I watched my setup forming. I've seen it play out 100 times and I knew what was coming next. But I sat there, watching price take off without me. I had notes, I had a process, and I showed up every single day. But knowing what to do is never the problem. It took me 3 years to figure out what it actually was and why fixing it had nothing to do with finding a better strategy. Here's what I mean. Growing up, we are taught to look both ways before you cross the street. You do this because you want to make sure that there isn't any cars and you want to obviously reduce the chance of you getting hit by one. And what this essentially is knowledge. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I listened to my parents, not necessarily because I understood why they told me to do something, but because I didn't want to get disciplined. However, there may have been a time when growing up, you heard about someone that you know, maybe it's a friend or relative, who ended up getting hit by a car and now has to deal with really bad damages. It could have been that, or maybe your parents showed you an example of the news of someone your age maybe passing away because of a tragic accident. And once you develop that emotional connection for why you should do something, knowledge becomes conviction. And essentially, knowledge is knowing what to do, but conviction is what makes you do something when the cost of ignoring it becomes real and personal. And this is exactly why you know what to do, but you don't have the conviction to actually do something. So for example, in trading, with myself, for 2 to 3 years, I was stuck in this cycle of hopping from strategy to strategy. I started off with whatever I was trading with when I first started, maybe just signals, and then I started to trade supply and demand. A couple months or a year after, I switched over fully into price action. And then 2 years ago, I ended up switching price action and started trading strict ICT. And here's the thing. I wasn't changing my strategy because my data told me to. I was changing my strategy because every single time I encountered a losing streak, to me, it felt like evidence that my strategy is no longer working. At this point in time, I had the knowledge to stick with one strategy. I read it in books, I've seen it in podcasts, but I didn't quite apply it yet because there was not any form of emotional trigger that turned knowledge into conviction. So essentially, what I needed was the cost of not applying it and the pain of not applying it in order for it to actually become conviction. I had this fundamental understanding that whenever I went through drawdown, it means that I need to change something. And to change something, it means that I needed more knowledge. However, my understanding of price action didn't really improve over the course of those 3 years. What changed was the emotional context around it. So what I actually needed was evidence that strategy hopping does not solve the problems that I want to be fixed. And once I had that evidence, then the knowledge of sticking to one single strategy finally became conviction. One of the key things to understand is that when you consume more content, more courses, more podcasts, the main thing that you're doing is adding layers to your knowledge, but not your conviction. So to demonstrate this, I drew out an iceberg. Up here, we have knowledge, that's a K, and then down here, we have conviction. So every time you watch more podcasts, that layer up here might get taller. It might get taller again with more and more knowledge, but notice how you're never really building the conviction down here. So eventually, when you're a break-even trader, you feel like you're so close to making it because you have all this knowledge of the years of courses and strategies and market understanding, but you're never really quite building your conviction in anything that you do. Thus, you end up staying in the same cycle, and you're never really able to improve. So if you're watching this video, more often than not, you watched a course or you bought something and you learned from someone, and they might have taught you the map of how to trade, and everything that they might have been teaching you very well could have just been valid. But the reason why you didn't apply what they taught you is because you didn't have that emotional activation. For example, someone that I've spoken to really recently came to me saying that they're dealing with a bunch of break-even related issues. So basically what that means is they didn't quite have the consistency to become profitable, but they had the strategy. I spoke with them. They talked to me about how they purchased courses in the past, and therefore they knew when they should enter, when they should exit, what is the market conditions that they should and shouldn't be trading in. But because they didn't have the conviction to actually execute their edge, that's exactly what kept them stuck. So yes, they had the knowledge, but no, they did not have the conviction. And going back to my own example, when I asked them, okay, so did you backtest? They said, well, I know I should backtest. That's the knowledge, but they weren't doing it because they didn't have the conviction. And mind you, this trader was maybe only trading for about maybe 1 to 3 years. So they hadn't quite gone through that same exact pain point that I went through a year or two ago. And to their defense, whenever I ask them, why don't you backtest? They tell me, well, I already learned a strategy and that person who I learned it from backtested it already. So why do I have to backtest it when I know that it's profitable? But again, you know that it's profitable. That's the knowledge, but you don't believe that it's profitable, meaning that you're missing the conviction. So again, just because you know something but you don't do it, it doesn't mean that you're dumb. It doesn't mean that you're ignorant. It just means that you haven't developed enough evidence that what you're doing is not working. So trust me, this video isn't just about backtesting. I'm just trying to explain the concept of why you may know something but you're not doing it just yet. And here's what we should be doing instead. So the way how we're going to apply this in our actual trading is by attempting to use knowledge which we learned from other people and turn that into conviction before we have those personal trauma. And it can be simplified through a little equation where we gain knowledge and then we have some form of emotional event, and that is how we get conviction. So first things first, if you don't have conviction in your strategy and you have a hard time following it and you haven't backtested it, that is the very first thing that I'd suggest to you. I'm not going to explain how to backtest, why you should backtest. I literally already made a video about that. But first things first, get this sorted out before you tackle anything else. And once you've gained the evidence that your strategy is able to still persevere through those losing periods, then that is when you're going to stop changing your strategy every single time you hit some form of drawdown. The second thing that you need conviction in is your risk management plan. How many of you have heard the simple saying, only risk 1 to 2% of your account per trade? That is simply knowledge. At least for me, when I first started trading, I was like, basically, if I risk 2% per trade, that means I have to lose 50 trades in a row to actually blow up my account. Why do I need to lose 50 trades in a row when I can risk something like 5% of my account, even maybe 10% of my account? And the odds of me losing 10 trades in a row is extremely rare. So why do I have to follow this like 2 to 1% rule? And it was only when I went through my own losing streak of, losing 14 trades in a row. I think the overall stats was like 20 out of 22 of my most recent trades were losses. That is when I found out that I can't be risking something like, 10% of my account or even 5% of my account, because look at this. If I was risking 5% of my account every single trade, this is my account equity. And then this is the flat line. I would have hit pan pretty much. So if you want to develop that conviction of using sound risk management, something that you can go to, and which I suggest all of the people who I work with, is go to a simulator. Literally run thousands of sample sizes of trades, basically just using your win rate, and see just how many times your strategy can end up with a loss of like whatever, number of trades in a row. So for example, it doesn't really matter what your initial balance is, but let's say you risk, 2% per trade. And this is the key important thing is your win rate. So we'll say on average, you can have a 50% win rate. That's like that's somewhat typical. And then, go ahead and fill out the rest of this. And let's say you take 1 trade a day. So that's about 20 trades a month-ish. And by running this, so 20 trades a month for 48 months, that's 20 times 48. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. But basically, if you simulate the returns, you get to see what is your likely, number of losses that you can take over the course of that many trades. So for some of you who are trading with a 50% win rate, you might think it's really rare to maybe lose 4 trades in a row, 5 trades in a row, 6 trades in a row. But look at this. Even just running this sample size, most or max number of losses is something like 9. And one of these sample sizes is 15. Mind you, I didn't run any Monte Carlo results for myself until I went through this losing period because I just didn't even fathom the fact that I could lose more than like 8 trades in a row. And if you try simulating this again and again and again, you'll see, okay, maybe 7 max losses in a row, 9 max losses in a row. But trust me, when you do this over and over again, you might see something like 15 or 16. And when you go through that and you see that it's very likely, or not likely, but there's a possibility for you to have a losing streak that bad, then that is when you gain the conviction in your risk management plan. That is when you decide, I'm not going to risk 10% every single trade. I'm going to risk something more sound, such as maybe 2%, because at the end of the day, what you are really looking for is capital preservation. So next, you need to develop conviction in your execution. And by execution, what I'm really talking about is the rules and routines behind what you are doing. So this is something as simple as having your pre-trading routine, something as simple as saying, if I have 2 losses in a row in a single day, I am going to be walking away from the charts. And I'm going to be honest with you, the only time that this knowledge becomes conviction is when you have an understanding and when you implement the rules for yourself. So if I tell you something like, as soon as you take 2 losses in a row, then walk away, you are probably not going to do it. The only time that you actually include some type of rule similar to that is if you take something like 3 losses in a row, but you didn't just take 3 losses in a row, you overtraded. So 3 became 4 and then 5 and then 6. And then next thing you know, your account, you blow it up. So that is when you can kind of put in those rules in place, because had you noticed that, taking anything more than 3 losses in a row, results in you becoming emotional, then that is how you put in place this rule. And you're going to be having that conviction because you already had that emotional event. Again, going back to the equation, we need knowledge and the emotion, and that's how we get the conviction. So basically, what I'm getting at here is whenever you come across something new on YouTube and it resonates with you and you feel like it makes sense and it becomes knowledge, try to brainstorm in your head first. How can I turn this knowledge into conviction? How can I gain that sense of emotional connection for why I'm applying the knowledge? If it's something as simple as, running the simulations over here just to see how many losses you can actually take, then do that. The core principle here is that developing conviction, if you don't do it the hard way, so meaning that you don't take all the losses yourself, you don't spend years stuck in the cycle of not backtesting, the only way that you develop that conviction is by doing really boring work. And that boring work is not glamorous. I mean, you're going to be backtesting for hours. For me, I had to sit out a month or 2, maybe once every single year for the past few years, because I had to spend time backtesting. And it's boring because you're not making any money whatsoever. It feels as though you're just playing a game, but you're not even having fun from the game. If you don't have the conviction now, you eventually will have it. You're just probably going to lose thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars. Some people lose a lot more than that, and that's how they gain that conviction. But at the end of the day, what matters the most is that you're continuously growing and learning from each and every experience. It's easy for me to think that had I not spent the last 2 to 3 years hopping between strategy and strategy, just imagine how much further I could be right now. But again, sometimes you need to learn the hard way, and that's okay. And if you're still in that phase of knowing what you should be doing, but you're not quite there yet and you don't have that conviction, I do 3 trading audits a week, 45 minutes. I learn where you're at, I look at what you're doing, and I give you real solid takeaways that you can apply immediately. It's not some general advice that you can hear on the internet. I actually factor in your situation, your trades, and give you the personalized advice that you need. And worst case, you walk away with a clear picture of what you're doing well and maybe the few things that you can tighten up. But best case, it changes the direction of your trading entirely. I've had someone get off the call recently and tell me that I literally saved them years and thousands of dollars just not repeating the same cycle that they've been stuck in. So 45 minutes versus 1 year of making the same mistake, it's not a bad trade. And if that sounds like something that you need right now, then the link is in the description. I only offer 3 slots a week. So when they're gone, they're gone.